Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm here with my friends, Brian.
Hey, Josh. Brian Zelmer from Kutztown University.
Katie.
Hey, everyone. Katie Miller with the Midland Center for the Arts.
Danielle.
Hey, it's Danielle Van Hook from the Alden in McLean, Virginia.
And our broken friend, Kevin.
Kevin Maynard rocking the claw from Rock Island, Illinois.
Maybe we should explain that.
For those of you that are listening and not watching, which is everyone, Kevin has a giant cast on his right hand. You want to tell us that story, Kevin?
Yeah, I was in a bar fight. So, or I was playing deck hockey and I fell. Nobody hit me. I slipped on the wet deck. That was it.
I think both are equally believable. So,
why did you choose red?
Well, I was going to do pink, but then I chose red because I have to do like 3 interviews over the next 2 weeks on TV. So I wanted to be on brand with Quad City Arts.
Consummate professional Kevin Maynard right there.
Always branded.
I really appreciate the branding of your injury. That is
why not?
When that's gone, you could just get a face tat.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Oh my gosh.
So I sat down with my friend Dan Mann, who he's been in the industry for quite a while. You'll hear about that here in a little bit, but he made a quick mention of chicken fingers in his episode. So I've got a question for all of you. What is your favorite handheld fried chicken of choice? Is it buffalo wings, boneless wings, chicken fingers, also known as chicken strips, or nuggets?
Oh, I will say buffalo wings, like bone-in wings for sure.
And why is that?
Oh, because they taste better. I don't know. I don't know. I've never really put this much thought into my handheld chicken preference.
Well, I have a 4-year-old, so I'm going to have to go with like all-time 4-year-old favorite chicken strips. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to say nuggets.
Really?
I did too. I thought you were going McDonald's nuggets.
You duped us.
Well, you know.
The old McNugget.
Being a mom, like you end up eating your child's food off their plate quite a lot when they don't finish it. So I tend to go with the chicken strips. So they're more fulfilling for me because I will end up eating 3/4 of whatever I make him. So we definitely go with the chicken strips in our house.
I go boneless wings all the way because they're not wings. They're glorified chicken nuggets. They're kind of like the best combination of strips and nuggets. And they hold the sauce the best because the sauce is really what I'm there
It's just the vehicle.
True.
Yeah. That is specifically barbecue sauce, additionally ranch, and sometimes also ketchup, but they don't all get mixed together. But I like to have at least 3 different options. The sauce abilities.
So those who listened to our holiday episode might remember when I was asked which cookie is my favorite, and I just said all of them essentially. And handheld chicken, that's enough. Like full stop there. I'll eat any of it. I like them depending on my mood. You know, it might be for the flavor, like Kevin's thing. You know, whatever. But I guess if I had to choose a favorite right now to just give you an answer, Josh, I'm thinking of medieval times, and technically it's a Cornish hen, but they give you that little Cornish hen and you tear it apart and eat it with your hands, and that was always a fun experience.
I like that Brian's answer literally involves him dismembering an animal as part of it. He's going like hardcore back into the days of instinct of just tearing apart his meal.
But it's not really handheld. It's on a plate. He's just subbing his fingers for a fork.
Hey, I'm eating with my hands. That's
handheld.
Let's go to the judges.
I guess to get it. Yeah, plate to your mouth. Okay.
And especially if it's a Cornish hen, I mean, that entire thing's handheld.
Yeah, this is my favorite starting question, I think.
Well, right now people are saying, "What's this podcast about again?"
What is this?
I love boneless wings, but I also love the traditional fried chicken. Like, I can never not go for a drumstick. Like that is my like handheld chicken of choice myself. And all of this is completely irrelevant to our interview, but I thought it was a fun way to start. So let's jump in. We're talking to Dan Mann, and you know, there's a like incredibly brief connection where he mentions chicken fingers. So enjoy the interview.
My name is Dan Mann, and I am the owner-agent at Agency ETC in Nashville, Tennessee. I have been in the industry since 1985, and I don't know how many years that is, but it's a lot. So that's what I do.
Well, thanks for joining us, Dan. Let's start and find out a little bit about you. How did you originally fall in love with the arts as a whole?
Well, it was in college. First concert, I was raised in the Midwest, had no opportunity, or my parents weren't into the arts at all. So the first time I ever went to a concert, I was in college, and I thought that was cool. So pretty much every Saturday night I was out seeing shows. And again, because of my background and upbringing at the time, it was the early CCM, or contemporary Christian music shows, that I was seeing every night while I was in college at UC Sacramento. Yeah, every Saturday night I would see that, and I thought that was pretty cool. I was working at a retail store, which, for no other reason than I was the college kid working in this retail store, they put me in charge of the music department. And so I got to know all of the up-and-coming CCM music and the musicians, and it was a large chain, so I got to meet the musicians as well as hear their CDs, or before CDs, their LPs, cassettes, prior to them even being released. And I thought that was pretty cool. So that was my first exposure to anything artistic.
So how did that then manifest itself into you getting into the industry?
Well, it wasn't on purpose. Yeah, this is a career by accident, I guess. I was at another store, staying in retail at the time while I was in college. And part of what I had to do for this Christian retail store was go out and sell things to churches, sell music programs, sell Sunday school material and things like that to churches. I was approached by a local musician who said, "Hey, while you're out there, why don't you just sell, some concerts for me, and I'll pay you 15% of whatever offering I get." As I did that, I added 2 or 3 others, local and regional musicians. Fairly quickly, I started making almost as much money selling them in these church gigs in the Central California area as I did in my retail job. And I thought, and so that started in 1985, and I've been in the business ever since. But literally, it was not anything planned. It was just all of a sudden I realized that I had a proclivity for sales. I knew how to put concerts on and put artists in venues that would like them, and that's what ended up happening.
Now, you haven't just been an agent since 1985. Your career path kind of went all over the place. So can you kind of walk us through 1985 through now career path, and how that progressed and how those things happened?
Sure. Yeah, I have friends who just flat out will tell you that I can't hold a job. But so I built an agency enough to where I had a client who had once been a national act, had toured open for Johnny Cash. So they'd had some success, had gone back and kind of semi-retired, and were only doing kind of weekend warrior stuff. But we were making really good money on the West Coast, and they wanted one more run at it.
Can you share who that was?
Sure. It was a band by the name of Brush Arbor, and they were a West Coast country bluegrass band. And in fact, Wayne Rice, out of that group, the older brother, was a family act, and the older brother out of that group became long-running president of the IBMA. So, I mean, this was an act that was pretty substantial. So in the conversation with that act, I moved back to Tennessee, not thinking that I would stay here, but I moved here in 1988 in part to get them to see what I could do about getting them a national record deal again. We got them a national record deal with Benson Records that lasted one record, and they went, "Yeah, we don't want to do this again anymore," and kind of went back into their semi-retirement and doing their weekend warrior gigs, which was great. But that put me in Nashville. Over the course of 2 years, some of the people that I met, some of the record company people I met, because I had a little office on Music Row, really small office on Music Row. Okay, it was a closet, but that's what I was doing, was, booking, just straight out booking acts, not doing anything else. And a guy came to me and said, "Hey, Triad Artists," which was a major agency at the time before they sold to William Morris. Triad Artists has this artist by the name of Glenn Campbell that has just cut a gospel record and nobody knows what to do with him over there. Part of his contract is he needs to go out and promote the thing, but they don't know who to call. Would that be anything you'd be interested in? I said, yes, oddly enough, go figure. I had Glenn Campbell for a little over a year while he promoted that record. I booked him mostly into large churches and into large Christian festivals and events like that for a year. We did, I don't know how many dates we did, but enough to put money in my pocket. But it also kind of put me on the map as to a guy that was willing to take things on or couldn't say no, however you want to describe that. And so so I'm booking Glenn Campbell, and I get a knock on my door one day, and it is the Sunday School Board of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is in Nashville, is an enormous entity in 1993. And they asked me, the question was, this is all it was, if you were going to start a record company in town, what would that look like? That was the question. And as a young guy, having just lost Glenn Campbell, Branson, basically, I kind of went, well, that's kind of a cool thing. So I told them what I would do if I was going to build a record company. 2 months later, they called me again. I thought, well, I'm going to get free meals out of this. This is cool. We can go to local Fern bar and have our iced tea and chicken fingers. At the end of the day, they came back and said, okay, now you've described it, you've articulated a business plan, what you would do, now go implement it. And so here I was, a fairly young guy in contemporary Christian music, and I wasn't one of the big players, but I started a record company for them. And for the next few years, whether it was them or whether it was other small labels, I helped find and facilitate distribution, or I would do the creative side, A&R, song publishing. I mean, I got my fingers in everything because they were small, and I would learn the industry from the inside out and figure it out. It wasn't like I had a mentor. It wasn't like there was anybody that was taking the time to develop. I just literally had to figure it out and ask questions. And if you're curious, you can learn pretty much anything. It's not rocket science, but it is something that you have to have fairly thick skin, because you hear no much more than you hear yes in this industry. But heck, I'm sitting here talking to you. You've told me no hundreds of times more than you've told me yes. Yeah. And you're still my friend. Yeah. So, but that's the entire industry's like that. If you've got thick skin, you're not easily offended, and you're persistent, and you learn, you soak everything up. I mean, there's hundreds of opportunities, and I took on everyone I could just to learn. And it's still going on that way. That literally my career now, we'll talk about that in a minute, but my career now is.
So where'd you go after that record label?
So after the record label,
Or what happened with the record label?
The record label ran for a year and a half. We went from high concept for that conversation to product on shelves and 7 Dove Award nominations within 7 months, which means I was working 90 hours a week. I was developing a team. I was doing all the marketing and all of the A&R. So I was in the studio every time I was sorting through songs.
And who were some of the artists that were on your label?
There was a guy by the name of Brent Lamb that was on the label. Brent was an artist, went on to be the lead singer of Shenandoah after Marty Rabin left for a short stint. Marty's back, by the way, and he's really good. Brent Lamb was one of them. There was a quartet. It was Big John Hall, Jim Murray of the Imperials, Terry Blackwood of the Imperials, fourth guy, I can't remember what it was. So it was kind of Southern gospel, but it was pretty hip Southern gospel. So I had a kind of for gospel, it was hip. Is that a thing? I don't think it's a thing. But in 93, it was the hip Southern gospel thing. So I was really proud of that record, although I don't own a copy. So that's what I did. And then at the end of that, then I was consulting with a whole lot of small labels and helping them get distribution and getting better known. And then I brought several artists into the fold and started a management firm until about 2001, 2002. I had a management company, and that's all I did. So I had several artists, had 3 of them on Reunion Records. So I worked a lot with Reunion Records in town. And again, all of this entire time, it was in the contemporary Christian music field. I had some CHR acts. I had one act, and I'll tell you who they are. Their name was Pillar. So they were real well, I would call them headbangers. I don't know if that's what they would call themselves. They were loud. That's what I. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they asked me one time because they saw that I was researching for a new record of theirs, music, and I had, Linkin Park CDs I was listening to, and I had all of these, and they're going, "Man, you really dig our music." I'm going, "No, man, it's too damn loud, but I know what to do with it." And so eventually they went from their really small label to Atlantic, based on the album that we had worked on.
You did that until the early 2000s.
I did.
And where did your career take you after that?
I got back into doing some small record labels and things like that. And then there was, let's call it a crisis of faith, where I just didn't know that I wanted to pound the pavement selling Christian music anymore. I mean, that's really what it was. I took a year off. I went into Home Depot and got a job in management training at a Home Depot store. It was Expo Design Center, so that's Home Depot. And I spent a year at Home Depot kind of hiding out and trying to figure out what was going on. And in the middle of that year, a guy that I had known in the music business when I first moved here in the 80s came and tapped me on the shoulder, and that was 2007, 2008. And he went, "What the hell are you doing here?" And my response was, "I'm having the time of my life, because when I leave this, I go home, I close my eyes, I don't think about it. I don't worry about the plumbing not making the show." I literally took a year off. He talked me into coming back and working. He had a book that was he had just gotten a hold of, and he had a speakers bureau, and he wanted somebody to come and represent that book and the speaker and do all of those things. And I mean, the book was, hadn't been published yet, but he thought he could get a publishing. So finally he talked me into it. So I went back and I started booking, and the book was called The Shack, which there's been a movie. It's sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 million books. And by the way, in publishing circles, that's
a lot.
That's it. It's a lot. So, I mean, it was just this enormous success. And so I worked my tail off for a year and a half on that until he said, "Hey, don't book me anymore. You're exhausting me. I've got to do something else." Well, so I'm back in the booking thing. So I get another job with another agency. Had been a Christian agency, or it still is, had contacted me and said that they wanted to develop a performing arts center agency. Now, I'd never worked in that, so that was 2010. So in 2011, I started an agency which is now called Ovation, the Ovation Agency. Jeff Roberts was there about 5 years, went on to New Frontier Agency for about a year. And then in 2019, I started my own agency, which I should have done a long time ago. But that's where I am, and I'm having a good time. But that's where my career has literally been all over the place.
So. And your agency isn't just an agency, it's also artist management.
Yeah, that's kind of where the ETC comes in. It means I own it. I can do whatever I want with it. So yeah, I do have at least one artist under exclusive management, and that's been really fun to book and to manage the career of an up and coming artist. That is, they toured for 7 years as Merle Haggard's opening act. It's not like they're unfamiliar with it, but traditional country music, as traditional as you can get. They're guys in their 30s who are singing Hank Williams songs and Merle Haggard songs, and then their songs that they write sound like Merle Haggard songs or Hank Williams songs, and all of the old writers in town, the writers who had #1 hits with George Jones and Merle Haggard and all of this are eager to write with them. Bill Anderson has written with them. Jeannie Seeley has an album, or has a song on the album, the new album, and things like that. So, I mean, this is as traditional country with, some pretty heavy hitters involved. And so part of what I did was then I had to put together an album in conjunction. So we have 2 producers on the record with them, and that's Ben Isaacs of the Isaacs and Doyle Lawson of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver. Both are producing their current record. In addition to that, we're also producing a television show that will be out on RFD in 2023. What year is this? In 2023. Yes, in part, my career today.
And this artist, the artist that you have exclusive management with and represent, That's the Malpass
That's the
brothers.
Malpass brothers. So yes, the Malpass brothers. Right now it's the only country act that, and by country I mean they have steel guitar, electric guitar, and drums, headlining bluegrass festivals, which traditionally has no electronics or no drums in any bluegrass set. But the Malpass brothers have charmed the bluegrass audiences to the point where they are headlining bluegrass festivals. They have their own festival in Denton, North Carolina. I'm back to learning. I mean, I'm learning what it takes to produce a television show. I'm learning what it takes to put creative with the budgetary constraints of the television network, putting all of that together and then getting cameras in their faces and shooting. What we will be doing is shooting 26 episodes of fun, what I hope is going to be a fun variety show.
And that's scheduled to come out in 2023?
It is, yeah.
What is it like to go from manager to producer? What are the biggest hurdles and the biggest learning points there?
The learning points are, a lot of it is terminology. Being a manager is, the best way I can describe being a manager, at least in my career, is having the ability to be liquid. So when there are cracks, liquid fills in the cracks. You just have to be able to move with the terrain and with whether you're managing expectations. You're managing expectations from the buyer, from the record producer, from the artist, you're just managing expectations. And you've got to be completely flexible. And it's the same in producing a television show. If I produced a television show, if money was no object and I could do what I wanted, it would look different than what it's going to look now. I have constraints, so I have to work within those constraints. And how far can I push it to the extreme to get within, but stay within the constraints, the financial constraints, so that somebody doesn't come after me.
As the producer and the manager of the Malpass brothers, you're working on this television show, and do you have to find the person to design and build the set? Do you have to all aspects of that? And how does that all come together?
Great question. If I'm doing my job right, I am finding the creative people who will get that done, as opposed to finding all of the little pieces myself. So I've got a creative director on the television show that has worked on other television shows and has worked for other television shows that have been broadcast on that network. And then I have just put in, or the network is just about to put in place somebody who, from their end, will kind of work with us to help develop and find all of that. They'll provide the grip camera guys and the lighting guys, and they'll handle all of that. So I don't have to do that. But again, it's a matter of negotiating and figuring out what I need, and then letting them go out and figure out how to put all of that into place.
And now you've said it's going to be a variety show. Have you started scheduling acts to be on that show, and how does that process work?
Well, yeah, we have talked with a lot of acts who have said, absolutely, I want to be on there. Have we started scheduling it yet? No. I did, for a show called Larry's Country Diner, I did a little bit of their talent coordinating for them on that show. Again, it's just trying to figure out who wants to be involved and if they can make the trip to Fort Worth where we're going to be shooting it, or do I need to come here to Nashville and capture it here? It's just a matter of figuring out the details, and pretty much everybody wants, if it's going to gain them audience share and relevance, they see the value in it and want to play.
And in shows like these, whenever talent comes onto the show, it's a promotional benefit for them. Is there any financial compensation for the acts to be on the show?
That depends show by show. So yes, there's always a talent fee. Those of us who are going to be working a show on a shoestring budget, so's the talent fee. It's going to be commensurate with my pay, which is going to be very small. It's actually an honorarium. It is a gift. There's not much money there. Some of the bigger television shows, obviously, you get paid quite a bit. But if you're a guest artist, there's very little. There's very little money left over at the end of the day. The Malpass brothers may not make. I'm hoping to cover their expenses, literally, for a year of shows. If we get 2-3 seasons in, then we should expect a payday. But first, second season, it's all about promotion and building up the audience. So
And it's great promotion for the Malpass brothers
live
as well.
shows, absolute live shows,
For their live show
CDs, because we have the opportunity to be able to do that. It's also an opportunity to gain sponsorship. I mean, we'll get paid off in different ways, not directly from the television show. So there will be, financial benefit to it, but that's not immediate and certainly not on the budget I'm going to be working with. So.
Now, whenever you have an artist that you're booking and managing, but then you've also got a number of other artists on your roster as well.
Sure.
How do you balance your time in promoting the different artists within your roster?
Not well. It's part of what I do is I try and structure a time period during the day that is devoted to agency work, which is making the calls and having the conversations, chasing leads, creating leads, just having conversations. So I'll block a big portion of my day to doing that. And then the early morning and the late afternoon, early evening, I'm finishing up the details on whether it's advancing a date or sending out contracts or all of that. And right now, post-pandemic, you don't want to hire people until you know you really can pay for it. Because our industry is I keep hearing the number, we're at 60% of what we were pre-pandemic. I'm doing better than pre-pandemic, thank goodness. But also I'm hammering the phones every day to make sure that I'm better than I was pre-pandemic. But the rest of it just comes, I catch it when I can.
And with booking those acts, is what acts you're going to pitch, is that dependent solely on who you're talking to and the market that they're in?
Yeah, and one of the reasons I have a fairly diverse roster, so it's not like I'm pitching 8 country acts. In fact, I've got 1 country act, 1 singer-songwriter, 1 radio personality, 1 bluegrass act, 1 jazz big band act. Across the board, it is very diverse, so that pretty much I can create have a conversation with pretty much anybody in small venues. And by small, anything less than 1,000 is where my bread and butter is. Mm-hmm. For over 1,000, then I can put together a show with the Malpass brothers. And for example, there's Wilkesboro Community College in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, that is bringing in an Opry-style show with the Malpass brothers, bluegrass act that I represent called Appalachian Roadshow, and a singer-songwriter by the name of Tia Goins. So we're going to do it like the Opry. You're going to be on here, you're going to be on here, you're going to be on here, and just kind of keep it going. That's the kind of shows that we have to produce for the larger venues. But having a variety of acts that we can kind of beg and borrow and steal from kind of makes it work.
There's one thing that we do here where we kind of take you back in time. I'd like to go back to that point where you're working in the store, managing the music department of that store, and just getting interested in going into the business. What advice would you give yourself at that point to help you move forward in your career?
Finish my law degree. That's what it was. That would be the advice. That was easy. I was going to be a lawyer. I was going into politics. I was a poli-sci major. None of this was planned or even considered. I've had a crazy fun career. I mean, I got to tell you, I've had a crazy fun career. I've been all over the world. I've been asked to sing or speak at places as odd as the Vatican. I mean, you don't get that everyday life, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I've had a crazy fun career, and looking back on it, it was hard. I mean, there were some struggling times when you're your own boss and all of a sudden you don't have enough money for the rent. That's tough. But now, as I look back on it, I'm able to cobble together a career and enough finances to pay the house note every month. And I can look back and be proud of the life that I had with no planning at all. Mm-hmm. So, but I often wonder what kind of a lawyer I would have made.
Getting started in the industry as a whole, what advice would you have for someone?
Find a mentor. I don't know that I can say that I actually had a mentor. I just wish I had somebody that had gone hey, I believe in you. Let's figure this. Let me help you figure this out because I've already done it. Literally, I've kind of run through and done most of the stuff that I've done without anybody kind of pointing me to it. So the T's that were crossed and the I's that were dotted were happenstance at best. And I really, really do wish that I had had somebody kind of walk me through it or had hired me onto a larger agency so that I could learn that. I mean, I was in my 50s before I worked at a multi-agent agency. So literally I figured it out by myself. Contracts, figured it out by myself. Got a whole bunch of other people's contracts for, doing other things. And okay, so let's cobble together a contract of my own. I mean, so from ground up, it literally was just figured out.
One thing that we're finding, especially today, during the pandemic, so many people left the industry. So much institutional knowledge was lost.
Yeah.
Having a mentor is a way for that to be handed down. And so I think that's such an important thing and such an important approach into developing yourself in the industry and being able to do it faster than being able to do it on your own is by having someone that can guide you just that little bit extra.
It was interesting. Here at AIBA, somebody, and I don't know which one of the seminars it was, somebody actually articulated, I don't think this was the way they said it, but the average age, the industry professional, it was pretty up there. And it didn't seem there were a lot of incoming people that were interested in being agents or being, working their way up in a venue. But if there are those people out there, I mean, I would love to pass on some institutional knowledge. I've got a son who is out there trying to book his own dates and things like that. But he wants, I don't know where he got the hard head, but he wants to do it himself. He's just now going, hey, Dad, is there anything you can do? And man, am I eager to help him, now that he's kind of going, hey, Dad, I'm at wit's end. How can I take this another step?
Being on here and kind of telling through your story is one great way to hand down some of that. Right now, with the industry as it is today, what is your favorite thing about the industry today?
I'll tell you what it is. I think that there is, in the industry today, much more than it has been in the past, there is an appreciation for not only the new, but also the old. Stories are being told in old-fashioned ways again and using genres of music that are quaint because they're so old. I'm working with an act by the name of Sean Johnson's Big Band Experience, and I love it. I'm having a blast with it. He's an incredible and an impeccable entertainer, great crooner, spot-on voice, funny as a crutch. And it's an old art form. It's not like you can go next door and get an arrangement done of a pop tune that's going to include, great horn section. So but that's what he's done. So he's got a great horn section and a great rhythm section, and it's new music done in an old art form. So those art forms that you kind of see going away are coming back. And then I work with the Malpas brothers who, good Lord, that, steel guitar on everything.
And I think we're seeing that in the overall country music scene as well, with success of people like Sturgill Simpson,
Right.
Tyler Childers.
Exactly.
I mean, these guys are coming back with incredible success. Chris Stapleton, obviously, and Jason Isbell. They're very much tapping back into that traditional country music feel and vibe and bringing us kind of out of what could be dubbed the bro country era.
And I know that there is, here in Nashville, there is I think it's the American Legion, Gallatin Road. There's on Tuesday night, they have it's old country. But the people who are out there listening to it and everything, they're all in their 20s. I mean, I didn't find out. I didn't know anything about it. But my son, who's 27, he's going, well, that's where you got to go. They got a steel guitar player out there who may be getting a call from me soon. But they've got a great show going out there, and they're discovering. So those guys, those younger guys, whether they're like my son in pop music or they have an appreciation for some of the older stuff. I mean, my son, he's a big fan of Merle Haggard right up until 72. Now, I don't know what that means, but he's just, he likes the old country, which that's great. I mean, and that serves us well for going forward, that there are genres of music. The sad part, the antithesis of that is that there are not as many ways to be able to hear those. Radio, what is left of it, terrestrial radio, is genre specific. And then you have to really hunt. There are only a couple of channels on Sirius XM that you can get, but they're limited by the amount of hours in the day that you can play. So a lot of great music is not being heard out there right now. So that's the downside of this. But the broadness of the performance, I would just encourage everybody to get out and see a show that you're unfamiliar with. And that's where it starts getting really interesting and fun.
So I've got one more. I want to be respectful of your time, but I've got one more kind of industry question for you is, what do you view the role of the conferences at the conferences? Is it more transactional or is it more relationship building that leads to transactions?
My expectations of a conference, whether it's here at IEBA or whether it was at Arts Midwest, North Carolina Arts Market, APAP, it literally was about seeing the people that I'm selling to, getting to know them face to face, getting to sit across a table of them and share a drink, hopefully share a laugh or two. Sounds like the ending to some variety show right there. It literally is about building a relationship. There are guys that I can call today I haven't talked with in 2 years, but I know that if they can pick up the phone, they will. And that's a rarity from what I'm told. But it's because consistently for the last 12, 13 years, I've had multiple conversations with them throughout the years, and they know who I am. They know what I'm going to represent, and they don't mind telling me no, which I got to figure that one out. But they don't mind telling me no, but they'll take my call because they want to know where I am, what I'm doing, and what I've got, whether it works for them or not. They'll tell me if it doesn't work, but there are conversations, and I enjoy that. They've become friends of mine, and I've had guys, quite frankly, tell me that I saw your number came up. I have it on Do Not Disturb, but I grabbed it, and that's a real compliment. So that's what I get out of the conferences is the relational. I go there to see them because I can make phone calls and not have to pay the $600 and some odd to come to the conference. I can make phone calls, but the value is in slapping them on the back, sharing a laugh, and a gin and tonic, having a good time.
Dan, thank you for your time today. Thanks for sitting down with us. I've really enjoyed it, and I think it's really interesting, the literal winding road and roller coaster of your career as it was through all the different aspects of the industry. So,
I like the roller coaster aspect. I was just thinking it was a train bound for nowhere. So yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it.
I think what I really loved is that early on in this interview, Dan says, if you're curious, you can figure out pretty much anything. And I think I love that because it distills very simply what we always talk about on this show. The things that we're doing, I mean, honestly, aren't all that complicated. And if you want to figure out how to do something, you can get there. You can call people to figure some things out, or you can do some trial and error, and it may be, take some more time or be a little bit costly, but you really can figure out how to do anything. And I just love that he brought that down just really simply right at the beginning there.
Yeah. He talks later on about how he didn't have any mentors. And we talk a lot about how important mentorship has been for each of us. And yet his curiosity is what drove him to get to the place he needed to be each time and learned. And I appreciate it also, though, later on, he said he would love to be a mentor himself because he recognizes that would have really been something he would have benefited from if he had that.
Well, and I mean, for me, he was somewhat of a mentor. He was one of the first agents that I had really built a relationship with whenever I started doing the booking and started going to conferences. And in turn, he and I have had a meal at every conference ever since, and we catch up and we talk. And he stopped by the venue whenever we've booked stuff in of his and sat in the light booth with me for random shows. So that relationship has been important for me because he was the first person that I really realized, oh, this is building a relationship in the industry. That set my path on relationship building in the industry forward, really stemming from Dan Mann. Touching back on the curiosity is that he had curiosity, and you can really, go anywhere with that curiosity, but you also have to be bold enough to step into a new situation willing to learn and do it. Looking at the situation where he was asked, hey, if you were going to start a recording label, how would you go about doing that? And being bold enough to come up with a plan to start a recording label in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, for real.
And then them coming back to him and going like, we really like your plan. Why don't you do that? We'll back you. What? Like I can't even conceive of, hey, why don't you go ahead and start this? We'll get it going. I was actually in Nashville at IEBA whenever I sat down with Dan. This was back in October, which I think is important to reference when he was talking about back to like 60% of audiences. But I had literally been on a scooter, kind of scooting around downtown Nashville, and I had gone past multiple enormous buildings that had this organization on them. And the organization isn't that large anymore, but it was back then. And so the scale of that organization, which in the 80s had multiple like 6 and 8 story buildings in downtown Nashville, that large of an organization backing you to start something like a record label is empowering all on its own.
I think my biggest takeaway, Josh, from your conversation is the term reinvention. Dan continually reinvented himself throughout the course of his career. You guys kind of joke about it being a roller coaster of a career, but listening through it, it was like, wow, at every moment or every, kind of like turning point, Dan was reinventing himself. And I think we sometimes get caught up in the like, I am only this thing and I can only be a programmer. I am only an agent, or this is my track. But Dan has done all of the things, literally from talent management to agent to promoting that book and doing, speaking engagements, now doing a television show with the Malpass brothers. Like, if that is not, like you said, flexibility and like being water and making the best of kind of whatever comes your way, I don't know what it is. And I think it's a great example of how you can live many lives throughout your career in the performing arts industry.
I like how he jokes about people's perception of that as well. How he jokes that some people in the industry will just say that he can't keep a job purely because that's the expectation, is you find a job and you stay with the job.
Mm-hmm.
But Dan, like you said, is reinventing himself all the time. And I just find his path really, really cool to step back away from and look at as an overall career arc.
Well, and I wonder how much of what we're talking about is like expectation or how we perceive people's careers are supposed to go, but how much Dan's trajectory is actually the norm. So many folks that we've talked to already on the podcast have had multiple iterations, multiple lives, multiple career trajectories. So is that actually the norm? And can we start breaking down like that thought process, especially for emerging talent? And something really to think about, like, what is that cultural norm within our industry? And do we all have to have one trajectory for 40 years of doing this work?
Yeah. And sometimes I do think it's hard to listen to somebody distill their career down into just a few minutes, because it almost makes it sound like it was a fairy tale, right? Like, oh, I did this for a little bit and then, luck kind of came and changed, where I was headed, and I could be a little creative. And then, I went and I built this whole other thing. And in some ways that's super inspirational, because I feel like we find those moments all the time. But I also feel like it could be really disheartening for people like we've been talking about, who are intentionally going into the industry. Like, they have the end goal, like they know what they're going to do. They're not just going to like fall into it, where it's like, it feels like that was so easy. But I really appreciated that he said at different points, like, yeah, I mean, like, there were years in there that were hard. There were years in there that like we almost didn't make it. There was a year he took off and worked at Home Depot. And it reminded me that like so many of the accomplishments or like the wins I feel like I've had have sort of come from learning something new or being flexible or being curious. But like, there are times when you feel like those things like should be happening, and it gets hard.
Josh, I really enjoyed learning about his start in the business through CCM. I didn't know anything about that part of the industry. I never listened to that music. And what I thought was really cool was that because of that experience, he then got to work with Glenn Campbell. And if you're under 60 years old, you may not recognize that name, but he was a huge pop star back in the day, and then transitioned into a Christian artist. And he probably wouldn't have had the touring career if it wasn't for Dan. I mean, what an opportunity there. We talk about the opportunities. This came up a lot with, we had this conversation when we interviewed Natalie. We've talked about it with Pat Hazel. We talked about it with so many people, that those opportunities do happen, but a lot of times we don't recognize them, or we say, we kind of block ourselves and say, oh, I'm not ready yet, or I've got to do this or got to do that. And we don't take advantage of it. But what we keep learning and keep hearing is, no, you got to keep yourself ready and be ready and look for those moments, because they happen for all of us. Just some of us don't recognize it or take advantage of it. But it does take both. You need to be ready for it. You need to be prepared for it, because if that opportunity happens and you're not, and you're just kind of sitting on your laurels, it's not going to work for you. But if you're working at your skills and your background and everything, and you're ready for that moment, you'll meet that moment and succeed.
I'm a big fan of the side hustle. Not a surprise to anybody. For me personally, a lot of my side hustles in the past have led to success with other things. At one point, I decided I wanted to be a photographer, and I started a photography studio and did that for a few years. And then that turned into a video production studio. And then the pandemic happened, and I had all of the gear and expertise and experience to immediately within a week start an online streaming concert series, because everything was already there at my fingertips. And that was all because of the side hustle. And to kind of touch back on what Katie was saying earlier, like, I have been in my position at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center for 16 years now, but I go in many different directions with side hustles, whether it's here now with the podcast or the mural painting. I love to take on new projects and new things and create in different ways, but those are all side paths alongside of what I'm doing here at the center in my primary role as executive director. And that's a way for me to follow my passions and experiment with different things. And all of those things that I experiment with and do outside of this add to my overall knowledge and experience that I can move forward with in my role here.
It's satisfying you because it's fulfilling your drive and your passion. But the bottom line is it's also benefiting your community in multiple ways. And that's no matter, even though all of our jobs are slightly different, that's what we all do, is we're bringing a service to our communities. And so even if it's just on the stage, or like you're doing in so many other ways, you're still servicing the community. And that seems to be what underlies everything that we do.
Kind of circling back to the TV aspect of him, creating the show, I think is obviously it's really interesting, and it does sort of align with a lot of things that he's done leading up to this point. But Josh, I really appreciated the finance and the compensation question on that, because a lot of times, like, it segues really nicely into artists being asked to, work for exposure or those kind of things. But Dan had a really good point and sort of reframed that and like focused on that. Like, that's up to the artist. It's up to the artist to decide whether or not, the compensation or what it's going to, cost them, whether that's time or money, is worth it, could be worth it in the end. And I think a lot of times, obviously, like, we and probably a lot of people who listen to this podcast understand that aspect. But there's so many people out there who, really truly believe that working for exposure is what artists should be doing. And the reality is, like, sometimes it makes sense, but most of the time it doesn't. Like, there's got to be some sort of compensation there.
And I think the interesting part about that for the artist with TV, there are metrics that they can kind of measure that against.
Yes.
Looking at the demographics of the network itself and of that program for the network. And so there are measurables that they can look at to evaluate what that exposure actually means there, as opposed to the vague generalistic, you should do this for exposure for your career. Come and
people are going to see your photos.
Those are the things where, artists are very clearly being taken advantage of. Whereas there's a clear metrics that they can measure against for their own evaluation of benefit for career.
When you can use that data too about who and where to when you're plotting out a tour. If you don't know that there are, a large number of people in, a corner of a certain state, then like you're going to find all of the venues in the corner of that state and try and figure out like how you're going to get a tour to go through there. So like you do get strategy and insight into things like that too. I also wanted to lift up an analogy that he used in the TV world about being a manager. He said he needed to be able to be liquid and a manager is somebody who fills in the cracks
I love that
and
too,
manages
yeah.
expectations. I love that metaphor for what a manager or what a producer does, because it's different on every job. That definitely like sums it up really lovely.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for hanging out with me and listening to the interview with Dan. I'm going to check out of here and go get some fried chicken. Thank y'all. Peace.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh, wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
I also didn't throw in like traditional fried chicken, I guess, is also a handheld chicken option.
I mean, anything's a handheld chicken.
Yeah.
Checked if you try hard enough.
Oh, I tried to applaud. I was like, oh no.
Oh, no, do snaps.
I can
Do it with
barely
one
see.
hand.
Oh, you can't snap with the claw.
You could do a tap with your thumb, probably.
Yes. Oh, jeez.